enjoyed. It was a caterpillar quilt, and they also got the book too. So that was donated to us. We had a raffle, so we fundraised $680. So thank you all. We really appreciate that. Well, the History Center, you've got to come back. We are refreshing that building. We have so many new archived items. I have new display cabinets. You can come down and take a look. We're getting a lot of things out on the floor so you can see things. Now, we are going through our membership, and I apologize. The MailChimp emails that went out, we could not attach the membership form. So if you did get an email, you didn't get to see this. But we have copies. It's on the website. So if you haven't renewed your membership or you'd like to be a new member, we'd love to have you. These are the forms. Okay. All right. I'm going to introduce Austin. He's our presenter. Oh, and I did want to say, next month, we're going to bring a box of pictures. These pictures were donated by several people, but there's no names, there's no dates, but sometimes we can't even recognize where they're at. So we're going to bring them to the program, and you could feel free to rummage through them. You might know somebody, write it on the back, help us out to see who all these people are. Okay? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Austin. Thank you. You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. Is this work okay? Can you hear? Is it vibing? No? Closer. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lisa. It's great to be here. Thank you to the Bridgeville Historical Society for inviting me. My name's Austin. Some people on Facebook call me the yearbook guy, which is kind of hilarious, but I've been asked to talk to you about the yearbook scanning project that I did for all the Chartiers Valley and pre-Chartiers Valley schools. I see John Euler here, who's going to fact check me the entire time. So I double checked all my things. I see him taking notes, so we're going to be real careful today. A quick note of what I did here. So I scanned all of the Chartiers Valley, Bridgeville, Scott, Heidelberg, all these yearbooks from 20 different schools, and they're all online for free. So anyone can go to the website at chartiersvalley.com, look at all the pages. They date back, Bridgeville's the earliest in 1925 up through 1960, which we'll talk a little bit about. And that's why I'm here. And part of the project is I actually got to embark on this very fun fact-finding mission. I went to Harrisburg, uncovered a lot of cool things about the 60s, the mergers, and that's kind of the fun stuff we're going to talk about here. We're just going to talk about yearbook scanning, the history stuff, the website launch, things like that. Nothing too crazy. So let you know more about myself. My name's Austin, like I said. I'm a Scott Township native. Was born and raised there. Went K-12 at Chartiers Valley. When I was there, it's no surprise I enjoyed helping the library, and then I actually worked doing a lot of the digital assets and archival stuff for their theater program, which was a ton of fun. Moved to Boston to work. I'm a software engineer, and then I moved back in 2022. And when I moved back, a lot of people have asked since then, like, why did you take this project on? And it's really hard to articulate sometimes, like, why, as a 20-year-old, I would want to spend my time in the house scanning yearbooks, doing those things. A lot of my, people my age are not always doing that. I experienced a really interesting part of life when I moved back from Boston. I actually had liver cancer. I had 80% of my liver removed, and I was doing pretty good. And that shook things up a lot. You get a second chance, right? And I actually found out my dog, a week after I got out of surgery, he also had cancer. So we went through cancer together at the same time. And so it was kind of this new chance. I'm back to where I lived. Oh my God, hi friends. I'm back to where I grew up. And I have a chance to figure out where did I come from? Who am I? A societal struggle that I experienced a lot when I was young was, for my generation, the push was always, you go to school, you do well, you go to college, you move away, and your measure of success is if you become successful and you don't come back. That's what, truly, for me, I guess I'm a millennial, partially a Gen Zer, that's what it was. There was a lot of pressure. So my entire childhood was, oh shit, I gotta do well on that test, I gotta do well on whatever not the MCAT, whatever it is, the SATs, yeah, you can tell I did really well. Go to school, move. So I tried that, but I was kind of I was missing a piece of me. I didn't understand, I grew up in Scott, and I knew of Scott and Heidelberg and Collier and Bridgeville, but I didn't understand what everyone mentioned about how different they were and why they behaved differently. And so I really wanted to figure that out, and I thought I had the really unique opportunity to do so. Sadly, this is the last side note, the dog died from cancer. It came back a year later, and I was like, you know what, it's winter time, I'm not going outside, but I might as well do something productive with my time. So I texted an old teacher of mine that I knew, and his name's Alan, and I said, hey, I really want to do this yearbook project. Would you allow me, would you trust me to take all these yearbooks that are irreplaceable, there's one copy, can I borrow them, scan them, get them back to you? No mention of whether he was going to get in trouble or not, but really, would you let me do it? And he said, yes, of course, that'd be awesome. So this is the actual text that I sent him. It's not super important. But before I embarked on scanning, I had the permission. I roughly knew how many there were going to be. I wanted to set myself a goal to make sure I knew I was doing the right thing. In software, we have this concept of a North Star. It's not a unique concept of software, but a North Star of I want to set myself a goal so I know I'm headed in the right direction, I don't get too far off base, and I don't go too far beyond the points. I have a very much completionist attitude, which I think one of the reporters reported. And so it's very important for me to set, like, okay, I want to make sure that I grow. I want to see myself grow up. I want to look at these yearbooks like anyone would normally do. Like, I want to watch myself grow up, K through 12. Let's figure out where I came from. But also, if I'm going to invest the time doing that, why don't I make sure that other people can benefit from it? A lot of people didn't have the resources or the money or the ability to buy these yearbooks or to go track them down like I'm going to dedicate time to. So my two goals were, all right, let's do the self-serving part of figuring out where you came from, but then let's also make sure other people can benefit from that while you're in there. So I texted Alan, I got this stuff, and so then I started scanning yearbooks. Now, you might think that, hearing us talk about scanning yearbooks, that the most interesting point is going to be how I scanned. It's actually the worst part. There was nothing interesting about scanning yearbooks. So this is a picture of me. That's my dog Piper behind me. And so every weekend I would go to my teacher's house. I would pick up a box of like 100 yearbooks. It was like hundreds of pounds. My living room became overgrown with just like the Scotty, the Lincoln Log, all these things just throughout my apartment. And I would sit on my floor, this is my coffee table, and I had this like book scanner, and I would just flip page by page by page. I'd watch TV. It got to a point where you didn't have to look at what you're doing anymore. You just got the muscle memory of like, all right, flip the page, scan it, hit the pedal, go. It's important to note that the type of scanning I did was called non-destructive. There's two kinds. So if you have a really old book, you can send it to someone, they'll rip the binding off, cut the pages, and they can scan it very fast. Unfortunately, because I don't own these books and they're priceless, I couldn't do that. So non-destructive is you lay the book flat, you go page by page by page. It was a really good time. And so, I scanned upwards of like 200 yearbooks, something like that. 2 months, all I would do after work and on weekends, like, all right, if I'm gonna sit here and be sad and watch TV, I might as well do something. So I'd scan and scan, scan. And it was a ton of fun. We're gonna fast forward to the very end, because we have a fun little journey of history we're gonna go through. But at the end of scanning, I scanned 250 yearbooks for 20 schools. Now that's kind of confusing, right? When we talk about Chartiers Valley, we know there are 4. So what in the world was I doing? We're gonna talk about the different schools I came across, but the Chartiers Valley collection had the Lincoln Log, some of them. They had some of the Scotty yearbooks, and they actually had some of Carnegie's yearbooks too, which was really interesting. So I scanned all of those, and I was starting to become kind of lost. I was like, well, I don't really know what year these schools started. I don't know when they ended. How do I know that I'm reaching every year, I'm not missing a critical year, something like that? For example, the Bridgeville yearbook, they stopped between, I think it was 26 and 1940 because of the war or something like that. And so it was very important to notice what gaps I was missing. So like any good investment portfolio, you gotta diversify. And so I started reaching out online. I was like, all right, friends in the community, so Bridgeville, all the places. I'm looking for yearbooks of these schools and of these years. And it was amazing. The response, people were so incredibly kind. It's very odd to think about a stranger post online and you're like, yeah, come to my house, borrow my yearbooks, I trust you. But people reached out and they're like, I think the project you're doing is amazing. Like, thank you for doing this. They invite me over, I'd grab your yearbooks, I would take them home, scan them, bring them back. And so for a time there during the day, or like after a long day of work, I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna suit up, get in the car, I'd drive through the South Hills through traffic. It was a great time. And this method works decently well. There are a few schools on here like John White, and I think Dewey was on here also, that I was able to get, but just 1 or 2 yearbooks. So this was good, but I was missing, you can see the middle school from 1976 to 1990. That's a pretty big gap there. So I know I needed to see if there was someone other than the school that would have a bigger collection, because Chartiers Valley had a decent collection, but they had gaps, like I mentioned. I actually reached out to the Carnegie Historical Society, and they do not have allow access to yearbooks. They had them, but they were like, that's not happening. They had concerns over, I think in the past someone had like stolen yearbooks from them, so it was understandable, but they were just like, nah, not happening. Which, okay, I felt a little defeated. And then someone mentioned, you should check with the Bridgeville Historical Society. I grew up near here, I had never heard of it. I was like, sure. And so I reached out to, I think it was Lynn on Facebook. And I was like, hey, are you guys open? And do you have these yearbooks? And they were like, yes, come in. And it was amazing. I walked in and they treated me like family. You walk in like, Austin, come on, come sit down. And we sat down and they talked about the project. I got some good gossip, not gonna lie, but had a wonderful time. And they, on top of all the stuff that Lisa was telling you about, like changing out the display, they had a massive collection of yearbooks. They had not just Bridgeville, but they had other municipalities, a lot of the CD ones. And they filled in the gap, I think, of the 25% I was missing, they filled in 24%. So it was a huge, huge help. And they were very nice. They trusted me. They were like, yep, go ahead and take these home. I signed my life away on a piece of paper. I don't know what I agreed to, but I brought them back as promised. And it was amazing. These things were like mint condition. Bridgeville, Scott, all these things. And I was really taken by that the Bridgeville Historical Society did not just focus on Bridgeville-related things. They had things from other municipalities that they might not want, or ones that did not have historical societies. It was amazing. They were kept, taken care of just as well as any other item they had, which was amazing. And so it's a really fun thank you. What I did is, you guys from Bridgeville are probably very familiar with this. There was a Bridger newsletter, and I think John was telling me that this was a newsletter that the high school put out between, I have the years here, 1942 to 1960. I think 42 is the earliest one that we have a copy of. And these are all on display that you can look at the Historical Society. And I also scanned these in. So on the website, you can go read all of the copies that they have. And this was actually really, it was very impressive to read through. Like, what a snapshot of time was captured in these. Oh, the senior class is going out. Here's the dances going on. And this really affirmed to me, you saw how central Bridgeville High School was to the community. That is not something that I grew up really experiencing. That's something we're going to talk about. But these documents were something I never expected to come across, but they helped instrumentally in me figuring out what was this all about. So that's on the website. That's super fun to look at. And the fun thing is you can actually search through it. So if you know someone's name, you can search and it'll tell you what issue they came up in and what page. The yearbooks don't have that because it's way too expensive. Okay, so I've been scanning, had a great time. And I get to a point after several months, I'm like, I don't know how much progress I've made. I still don't know all the years of things that I'm missing. I lack a lot of context on Bridgeville history, Scott Township history. And I'm getting close to my North Star of like, you have some yearbooks, but my family's here. If you know me, I have an inability to like not complete something. And so I had to make sure I got everything that I possibly could. And then, you know, in talking to people sometimes, they're like, well, I don't think the Rennerdale School actually need yearbooks. And I learned a lot that our memories play tricks on us, and you hear conflicting stories. And so a lot of it, just from word of mouth, was very hard to be like, yeah, this yearbook does not exist. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really know how far back I need to go. I don't really know what I need to do. And what I was able to make, I'm gonna go to another tab over here. Let me find my mouse. This is called a lucid chart. We use this in software engineering to diagram how things work together. This is a complete history of every municipality in Chartiers Valley. I know it's very tiny from here. If you go on the website, you can play with it. but this describes Bridgeville, the school starting in 1875, how it got removed by a flood, how they moved to the Bridgeville High School, which I think became, was it white that Bridgeville became at some point? And so you can see like, okay, yeah. It was Lincoln, then white, and then it details, okay, well then Chartiers Valley, the jointure, which we're about to talk about, formed. And so this is a really great resource that helped me through here that I made of like, this looks like a spaghetti mess, right? And that's basically how it was in the community, I imagine at the time. I was not alive for it, but it's like, all of our schools are merging, things are changing, but I don't know where they're going. So drawing this helped me understand where the schools went and where they merged, but the big question I was missing was why. I was very curious, like, well, why did they spin up a new senior high school? Why did we take a school out of Bridgeville? Things like that. And I knew that the only way I was gonna find out was to go to Harrisburg and look for a infamous document that is nearly impossible to find. So let me get my cursor back over here. Okay, so I went to Harrisburg. This is the Pennsylvania State Archives. It's actually beautiful. It just opened during COVID. All the state's archives are here from every governmental department, every governor. Like, for example, you could read personal letters that people wrote the governor. We found some from the 70s or something like that. But it was gorgeous. And so I reached out to a researcher there. I'm like, hey, I'm looking for these documents. It was probably around the 50s or 60s when these schools started to merge. Like, I heard there was animosity and drama, and I'm not sure what happened. And so they gave me a rough idea of like, here's the 30 boxes of documents that you can request and look at. And it was truly incredible because we walked in, I conned my partner to go in with me, and there was a librarian, this verbatim, she's like, you're gonna sit here. Everything you do is filmed by cameras. You do not move. You need something, you sit there and you raise your hand. You do not pass documents between one another. She was so mean. Luckily, as the day went on, people heard more about what we were doing. I took my own scanner. They charged, it was like $1 per page of scanning. We scanned 2,000 pages that day. So they very nicely let us take our own scanner and go through that. And it's really, the things we found were incredible. We're gonna go through some of the documents, but there was one that I was looking at. It's referenced in some search papers, but it's not available anywhere online. It's like a mystery. And it's this. The Governor Lawrence back in 1960 got a panel together, and I think it was called the Panel of 100. And this is probably one of the most incredible reports I've ever read from a government agency. The state at the time was trying to figure out, like, we're spending so much on education, we're not competing. The Soviets, specifically Sputnik, terrified the US, and they were like, our education is not where it needs to be. So the US, like the federal government, started looking at education, but then Governor Lawrence got together this panel of experts and was like, how can we do this? How can we make this work? How do we get a better education? And so what they did over the course of about a year, they worked together to look at all the school districts and come up with a list of recommendations on how they felt it could be made better. And there's a lot of stuff here. These are some exact quotes, but really what I found the most incredible, and this is something that impacts every single person here that probably grew up here, their findings summarize that larger schools, bar none, offered a better curriculum. The bigger the school, the better the course offering, the higher the graduation rates, the better the college admission rates. And I think they, like, it was a very, it was bold in the report. They offer more education for the dollar, they simply offer more education. And that kind of got the ball rolling, where it's like, listen, Pennsylvania at the time had 2,227 school districts. If you look at other states, that's absurd. Most states have like one per county. There's some education researchers that definitely know more. But Pennsylvania is like, we can't keep doing this. We need to find something to fix. And honestly, I would, if you have the time and you're interested, the full report's on the website. If you read through it, it is one of the best articulated documents I've ever read. Their findings, and it was just a prime example of leadership. I know that that document changed everyone's lives and we're still not happy about it. I get that. But really, they underlined that, like, we don't just like need better education, we like demand it, and it's gonna be the best that we can possibly give the kids. Yes, the impetus was like, we're scared of the Soviets, and we also want to save some money in the process. But it was really, their findings summarized, like, you need to put the money aside, focus on the education, and the cost savings come from there, which is really cool. So, this is a big timeline. This covers kind of the entire reorganization period. The website has a really, if you want to read, like 10 pages of stuff on there, but I'm going to kind of go through some of the big milestones here. So 1949 rolls around, and Pennsylvania says, all right, we need to start thinking about reconsolidation and making things smaller. At the time, you could have a single municipality. This is not true, but I'm going to use Scott as an example. You could say Scott Township, they have 4 school districts. They have 4 independent schools. They're all their own thing. They don't work with one another. They're not managed by the same person. And so the state came around and said in Act 14 of 49 that every municipality constitutes its own school district unless they're already part of a bigger district. That's not exactly when, like Bridgeville, I believe Scott, and probably Heidelberg already had their established school districts, but this mandated it statewide. I couldn't find a metric on how many school districts this took us down, but that was the very first toe in the water of consolidation of the schools. And then 1952 rolls around, and they're like, okay, Allegheny County needs to figure out a little bit of how are we going to administer all these school districts. We have some new ones, we've consolidated, but how do we better manage them? And I want to talk about, this is what a hierarchy of the school looks like in 1950s. The State Council of Education, they're at the state level, they dictate each county in Pennsylvania. How many counties are in Pennsylvania? Thank you. So there's that many, and each one had its own school board. And then at the county level, they had different administrative units. They would say Allegheny County is broken up into 30 units, and then each unit would have multiple different municipality school districts. And it was really interesting because the school board at the county level held a lot of the power here. Scott Township and Heidelberg, Collier, Bridgeville, they all had their own school districts. At the time, they had their own school boards, but they could not set their own curriculum. At Pennsylvania, even to this day, these schools here are not considered I think it's a class 1 or tier 1, but the superintendent at the county set the curriculum. They were the ones that decided. And that was very interesting. Some people weren't exactly thrilled with that due to autonomy purposes. And once they started kind of figuring that out, our municipalities here, they're like, I think I saw the writing on the wall, and they're like, listen, it's about to be merged or be merged. So 1955 is when they all enter a jointure, and there's a distinction here, is that there is a union. There are 2 things allowed in the law. A union meant that school districts would physically merge to one, and it's just one school district, one board, one everything. What our municipalities did is they entered a jointure, and I'll show you like an example of what that looks like in a second. But that meant that Scott Township had its own school district, its own board. So did every other one. But there was now this Chartiers Valley Joint School District that everyone elected their own members to. So they basically spun up a 5th school district that they knew they were going to start moving things into. And that was fine. One of the big things here is that Scott Township was really highly sought after because they were the only district that had buses, and they used that as a bargaining chip quite a bit. It's not covered here, but it is on the website. Carnegie was acting up around this time. Carnegie was like, we want in, we don't want in. Like, we want to be our own school district. It was a whole thing. Carnegie really got themselves into quite a mess that we still see today, starting around 55. But so we have this jointure. It's really cute. And then in 1958, they're like, we need new schools. Because we still had all of the municipalities. We had the Bridgeville High School. We had the Scott Township High School. We had all of them. And so they're like, all right, we're going to commission some new schools. You all might be familiar with the Chartiers Valley Joint Senior High School, which today is the intermediate school on Swallow Hill. It was the first one they commissioned to the tune of, these are all today dollars, $21 million. They also recognize that we have a lot of elementary schools and we need to get them together as well. So the joint schools commissioned 4 elementary schools. That was Henry E. Roberts, Heidelberg, E.L. Shepherd, and Washington. All of them are around like $5 or $6 million of their commissioning. all happened in 1958, 59, groundbreaking happened, they started building. Nothing changed for the community at the time. Everyone still went to their old schools, still did their own thing. This is what I was talking about in a jointure. So all these school districts down here still have their own independent district, their own board. These guys still have their own elementary schools, so they were still fully in charge. The Chartiers Valley Joint Schools had no say over, let's say, one of Bridgeville's existing elementary schools. That's not how it worked. They elected a joint board, and however, the joint school district was now in charge of the joint schools that they were commissioning. And so that's how things started to kind of shift from there. So 1958 rolls around, and the state is like, they doubled the expenditure, the total state expenditures for education from 16 to 35, and they were like, okay, we know that this is expensive, we know that things are starting to get rough. Governor Lawrence comes in, like we talked about, and was like, we need to do something about this. So it was 1961, they enacted its PA Act 561 and 299. It was actually the reason that Lawrence, I think, did not win re-election and Scranton took over. Statewide, they knew this was gonna happen. And this is where it gets interesting, because you could see that all these mining towns were like, no, we have our own identity. This is us, we are not merging, that's the end. And that was a fun thing that I learned throughout this process too. But they passed this act, Scranton comes in and repeals parts of it and reenacts it, but they're like, it's still happening. And what that did statewide is kind of set the shockwave that in 1964, the counties had to decide what schools were merging. They had final say, they reported to the state, and that's that. Now, that was kind of a violation at the time of the autonomy that these municipalities and school districts had. So they were not pleased, needless to say. They were not having a good time. And so there was a ton of fighting. Allegheny County was trying its best. They were drawing up lines. The documents we found actually were from different school districts trying to appeal to the state, saying, we don't want to be with this person. It's disgusting, some of the things they said about people in other municipalities. Was it Fox Chapel said some horrid things about whatever municipality they somehow did not get merged with. But these were all documents that were never made public. They were sent to the governor, they were sent to the state, they were just put in a box. And now they're all available online, not to start drama, but to show you that, like, there was a lot of fighting that happened behind the scenes. This was in the news, from what I can tell. And I know that you all lived this opportunity, or like this time, but from what I can see, it's like, you could just tell just from the news articles, the letters, that people were not pleased. This was not something we wanted to do. So, 1961, we have 2,227 school districts. In 2025, we have 500 in the state. So we can see that at some point, we made some good progress. So something that happens really big between 1961 and 64, Allegheny County was like, all right, Bridgeville, Scott, Heidelberg, Collier, you guys can be together, but you're also taking either Green Tree or you're taking South Fayette and West Deer, I think it was called at the time. And the joint schools were like, no. South Fayette was in the state considered the worst financial position in the state. And Chartiers Valley basically said that, like, we will dissolve and we will not become a merged school district because just taking on South Fayette alone will bankrupt us to the point where we cannot function. These, Carnegie somehow got the state to send investigators in, and the state was like, yeah, that's pretty much the tune here, we can't do that. And they fought and fought, and Allegheny County wasn't budging. They were running up to that 1964 deadline, and the big problem here was, if the county did not submit a plan to the state got to decide for you, and you had no appeal option. So Allegheny County knew, it's like, we're gonna try, you might not like it, but otherwise the state's gonna pick, and you have no local representation in what's happening here. So, very interestingly, Chartiers Valley went to the PA Supreme Court. They sued the legislature, saying that Act 561 and 299, which forced and gave the state power to reorganize, saying it's unconstitutional, can't force us to do it. I appreciate that they tried, they were wrong. It was blatantly constitutional. Both Allegheny County Court and the PA Supreme Court, within 12 hours of receiving their thing, denied it instantly. But what they pointed out is that CV had the option under the law to submit an appeal directly to the state, saying, I understand Allegheny County's plan, but I don't like it. And so what they did in 1964, after they suffered the defeat of the Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that is, they said, we want to be just us four. Collier, Bridgeville, Heidelberg, what's the other one? Scott. We want to be just us. And the state actually granted it. This is the original document, the original one that was signed and put in whatever little folder. And it was very fascinating, and I know it's really, really tiny. I can barely read it from here. But they basically said, the Board of Education directly approves that Administrative Unit 63, which was the CV, Bridgeville, Collier, Scott, and Heidelberg, and they would put South Fayette independently in their own thing. It was very interesting. This document, I know it changed a lot of our lives, but this changed my life 30 years before I was alive. This was fascinating. So CV had been fighting for this, basically for 20 years, saying, we just want it to be us four. Like, if we're gonna have to do it, this is gonna be us, and we're gonna do it together, but hopefully not with too many outsiders. We're in a good financial position. We have buses, we have these resources, we think we can provide, but we can't get tanked in the process. So it works. 1965, the appeal is granted, CV remains CV, and then in 1966, they submit the naming. Previously, they'd been operating under the Chartiers Valley Joint School District, quite a tongue twister, and the state unofficially had been referring to them as the Chartiers Area School Districts. And so the joint board in CV submitted up to the state and said, we want to be known officially as the Chartiers Valley School District. The first time it was ever referred to as just that, not joint. And so this is a copy of the document, but this says the Chartiers Valley School District has been approved. This school district becomes official on July 1st, 1966. When July 1st, 1966 happens, all of a sudden, Chartiers Valley is now one school district, one thing. Bridgeville, Scott, Heidelberg, and Collier's independent school districts dissolve. They elect a new board up to the Chartiers Valley School District, but it's one to rule them all. Chartiers Valley goes from technically having 4 or 5 schools they commissioned to now having over 12, because they inherited all the elementary schools, everything else going on there. And from my understanding, like, that's a big challenge, going from a very big management structure to that. Something that I know you all know very well from what I've read is that it was very hard to merge the student bodies. They did it when they started in I think it was 61 at the Chartiers Valley Joint Senior High School, but now everyone from all schools, like, you know, you start that school year and it's kind of fine, but as time goes on, as we're going to see, the identities start to merge and merge and merge. It's no longer I went to school in Bridgeville, it's no longer I went to school in Scott. So I went to CV. And so through the 1966 to 2000s, that's when CV really starts to consolidate. We think that the big thing was forcing them to be one school district, right? But in reality, they started as one school district in 66, which is great. 73, they're like, we need a new high school. And that's the Tom's Run Road one, the big circles. Love that place. And they were like, all of our high school students are going there. So we moved from Swallow Hill up there. What is now the intermediate school, what was then the joint senior high school, then became the middle school. So that was also in 73. Eventually they moved the middle school kids up. But then they waited a while until the 90s. In 1994, they got the idea of, like, we need to basically consolidate all these elementary schools. A lot of the elementaries were still in each municipality. Like, this is just not sustainable for us. So grades 3 through 5 in 94 moved to what is now the Chartiers Valley Intermediate School on Swallow Hill, and they closed some of the elementary schools. 1996 happens. I was born in 95 for context, and that's when the Chartiers Valley Primary School, which is also on Tom's Run, but I think it's at 125, opens, and they send K through 2. That year is the last year for any independent elementary school in our municipalities. It was over. 1996, Chartiers Valley was able to execute that vision, right or wrong, but they were able to execute the vision of, we now have 4 schools for our 4 municipalities. All students go through the same schools, they get the same opportunities, the same education as anyone else in their age range. And I know everyone's still familiar now, but that kind of rode for a while. Chartiers Valley Primary School was state of the art. It was great. I remember growing up there. It was beautiful. And then in the 2010s, they built the new middle and high school. They're in a terrible financial situation. And so, like, the story just continues and continues. But really, it was like the 90s is when the end of the individualized municipality school identities happened. Over that time period, of course the local identities eroded and changed. And the questions that I had after doing this project was, I was talking to John specifically, and John mentioned that back in the day, the high school was the focal point sometimes of a community. It was in Bridgeville, from my understanding. I'm sure it was in the other municipalities. And when you suddenly kind of rip that out of the heart, although the Chartiers Valley High School was in Bridgeville legally, it's not in the center of the town, right? It's pretty far over there. It's no longer there. And so I heard from multiple people that like the identity changed. The town square of what we used to think of like going out on a Friday night or doing things like that changed. But now, the local identities of the kids started to change too, because it's no longer, I'm just from Bridgeville, I go to Bridgeville, and then I move on. It's kind of like I'm from Bridgeville, but like I'm part of this bigger thing. I'm part of Chartiers Valley. And one of the questions I have is like, how long did it take for that, that sense of I'm from Bridgeville to fade? Not to fade away completely, but to no longer be as strong as I imagined it once was. Now, through all of that, you would think that I learned the most about myself from looking at myself in the yearbooks, right? That's why I started this project. I never looked at myself at once. I scanned all those yearbooks, I never looked. I just like went through it and I realized that the part that I was missing the entire time wasn't myself physically, but more of like, my generation was the very first one in '95 of this new Chartiers Valley identity, but just Chartiers Valley, nothing else. So I grew up in Scotland. Not that it didn't mean anything, but to my identity, it didn't change anything. And so I learned that a lot of the stuff that happened and the weirdness I felt was because I was a part of a new group of people. I also learned through this project that mining towns, they're pretty fiercely independent, and like they gave a really good fight during the whole like consolidation process. They went to the Supreme Court, they were fighting. It's like, no, it wasn't just that we want autonomy over our schools, but it was like we don't want our identity to change, which is just fascinating because it's not something you see all that often today. I was very fortunate. Everyone, all these fights, these legal battles, these 10, 20-year plans that the school districts had to enact and hope were followed through, I personally, I think, was given great opportunities. Everyone I grew up with, we had the same opportunities, we had the same courses. I never, ever worried about going to school and not having a class there. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with the consolidation process, but more of my experience that I figured out and I learned is that despite the differences in these identities and despite the fighting that happened, no one has ever been anything but nice to me about it. No one growing up ever questioned, you're not from Scott or you're not from wherever, like get out of here. Even though they still had these identities, they still treated my generation as if we were still part of it. It felt like family. And that was something that I felt very much when I walked into the Bridgeville Historical Society, is they treated you like family instantly. It was no longer where are you from. And it was really beautiful. So I was looking in the wrong place the entire time. I thought that I would find myself through a yearbook and see myself grow up and get old. But really, I needed to understand where the communities came from and why it felt different when I was a kid. It was truly it was a very special journey, and I was looking in the wrong place the entire time. And I feel like that second chance I was talking about is off to a better start because it was that missing puzzle piece. It's really amazing. So I did self-discovery, great, whatever. But now we have all these yearbooks, we have all this history. How do we share it? How do we make it cool? So what I did I scanned the 2,000 pages. I think for 2 months, for 12 hours a day on the weekends, I would sift through them, research, and write. It felt like a master's thesis, and I'm tracing things back to Chartiers Valley, how it basically came all the way from William Penn's dad's debt to the King of England, whatever. So I put all the yearbooks up there, and I put the website out. First 12 hours, 3,000 unique people went to the website. When you think about the size of our communities, that's a lot of people. I honestly, expected to get in trouble for doing this project, which we'll talk about, but I never thought anyone would actually like really look at it. They'd get nifty, like, oh cool, that's cute, but not like a wow. So 3,000 viewers, and then because the yearbooks are so big and people looked at sometimes 13 years of themselves grow up, it costs $200 in 12 hours of the hosting costs to deliver the yearbooks to you. I did move it somewhere else, so it does not cost me that anymore, thank goodness. But that was a very good learning lesson for myself. When I write software, I always tell people, like, I don't really care about the software. I really care, I care about what people do with it, and then it makes a difference to whoever I'm doing it to. It's always been something my bosses have always struggled to understand. It's not just like, I don't want to just make you money. I want to make a difference in what I'm doing, maybe in the process. And so I got amazing feedback, and people are so incredibly kind, and they said, I sat on FaceTime with my sister that's across the world, and we looked at ourselves grow up. We looked at every single yearbook we were in and laughed. And people said that this was super nostalgic, and that they got to connect with people that they hadn't seen in a long time. And it was just every piece of validation I never could have asked for, but God. It was beautiful, and it just meant the absolute world to me. So the ability to make the immediate impact. As of today, 10,000 unique people have looked at the website. It's not 10,000 visits, it's 10,000 unique individuals. And they come across from all over the world, which is really fun. So I think some of the people here that have moved away, Sweden seems to have quite a few Chartiers Valley graduates for some reason. And it's been a ton of fun. Something I'm extremely thankful for is, so remember I mentioned I was really scared I was going to get in trouble? I was really worried CV was going to be pissed and be like, you did not have our permission to scan the yearbooks, you did not have our permission to put them online. And I was prepared for a fight, but they were extremely kind. They actually reached out to me and said, it was very, 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 very sweet. Congratulations on this accomplishment. We're extremely excited for you. This is a great project. Thank you. So I'm not affiliated with the school in any way. They do not pay for anything. They do not pay for anything. But it's very kind to get their kind of seal of approval and you're not going to get sued, which was perfect. They got me in touch with someone from the Trib Live and the Post-Gazette. Both of them wrote incredible articles. And Bob from the Post-Gazette, again, went and talked to people that said, I couldn't afford yearbooks when I was growing up. I cheaped out, I didn't get to do it, and I've always regretted that. And so this was kind of like a second chance for some people to be like, I wouldn't even know where to find them. I don't know who I would call to buy 12-year yearbooks from. And it was really special. And it's meant a lot for everyone that I've heard from saying I got to connect with someone or relive some happy moment, which was really, really special. And so that kind of brings us to today. So the archive's up there. It has the entire Pennsylvania legislature stuff. I worked with a lot of people in the General Assembly's offices to get legal scans. That's all up there. There's 12 pages of information about what I just talked about here in much more detail and tawdry details on Carnegie. That's all there too. And moving forward every year, I personally paid for yearbooks from Chartiers Valley, and I donate them to the Bridgeville Historical Society. As long as we're still making print yearbooks, I think it's important. This project never would have been possible if someone didn't do that before me, and so I want to continue that practice. The last thing I would say is if anyone was considering doing a project like this, like I said, I was really nervous, maybe a little bit embarrassed about what people would think about it. I was worried that people were going to get angry, and then I guess if you're worried that you're going to help some people but piss others off, you're probably on the right track. It has helped. It's worked so far in my life, and this project was no exception. But thank you guys very much for coming. I really appreciate it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has about the process or anything like that. Hi.
This whole subject is like in my backyard because my master's thesis was on the correlation between the growing size of schools and the dropout rate. And I found that usually when you do a master's thesis, you have to find the negative plus the positive. You have to mix them. I could not find one single negative article or document that disputed my thoughts on it. And it was that the larger the schools grew, the dropout rate increased. And especially out in the West, which by the way, Bill Gates and his wife have been involved with New Mexico and Arizona in donating money to build smaller schools. At one point, New Mexico had 17 school districts in the entire state. And one of the reasons for the dropout rate being in the West so high was because it was 60%. Because of the Hispanic populations in a lot of those areas and across the border. But they have actually dropped that rate in 20 years since they started doing this down to about 30%. So that it has really worked. But I also, part of my thesis I went and interviewed students in a large school district, Seneca Valley. And they told me something that the other people in the articles never told me, and that was they felt like numbers in a huge conglomeration of school districts, which Seneca Valley is one of the largest in the region, and they just felt lost. So that was one of the purposes that I had in doing it, but that opened my eyes up tremendously because I was in curriculum design, and that was one of the things I was trying to solve was the way that the school districts got too big, and then if they could just get a little bit smaller, I think that they would work tremendously better.
That's interesting. Did they find that there's a sweet spot of like, not per square footage, but like, did they find a sweet spot in number of school districts?
Well, they found that they got too big, but when they started breaking them down, they didn't break them down to the sizes of like we had before, Bridgeville, Scott, Carnegie, but they got to a medium where it seemed it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was before. When they got tremendously big, I mean, in a state as large, not population-wise, but as large as New Mexico is, 17 school districts, we probably have more than those in Allegheny County.
Right.
So it was a tremendous, responsibility for people like the Gates to think that this would help, and it has. It hasn't been perfect, but it really has helped them. So I found that tremendous, it opened my eyes a lot to the schools.
That's really interesting. Like, if I think about the process of going from, let's say it was like PA did like 2,227 down to like 17. It's a big change. And then if you suddenly do that, you start to feel lost. If you claw that back, it's like, how do you rebuild the local identity that you kind of just like skipped over? Like Pasco did not get $200. So I imagine like if it went from our 4 municipalities to just being one Allegheny County school district, which would still be too small, based on the numbers we're talking about. But like, I could see how you would feel completely lost and completely, it's just like, where things seem to be now, at least just my personal experience, was like, I feel somewhat anchored. I'm kind of confused as to what's going on here because I didn't understand the things that were going on. But I still had some attachment to my local community. The people pretty much still lived here. So it's like, it just felt like a smaller form of like government almost, was like you feel invested because your reps are here and like it matters to everyone. That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
It was, like I said, it was an eye-opener, and I did a lot of work on it. And my goal was to send it to the state so that they could see it. I never got to that point, but I probably should have.
We had I can't remember the name of the governor, I was too young, but he wanted to change from 550 school districts to 100. That was a big part of his campaign. And luckily that died in the Senate. It did not happen. And so we just kind of sit at our 550 today. Yeah, hello.
You mentioned that the larger school districts, the greater the dropouts were. Why?
So what the thing that I think we're referencing, if I go up here, and I think it's part of their report, sorry, it's like right up there. The Pennsylvania legislature, the report here, I'm sorry, it's in my notes, that's why. The larger the school district, they found the least amount, like it was proportionally lower to the amount of dropouts. I think what we were talking about over here is that when you get way too large, then it becomes, you start to get diminishing returns, you start to have more dropouts. But at least in their proposed plan, from what they saw in Pennsylvania that led to all this stuff with CV, is they saw like a small increase in size led to a large increase in graduation rates. That's what I was able to find through this research.
But what were the reasons for the dropout?
Yeah.
One of the reasons was, as the school district got bigger, the classrooms got bigger, and there were less teachers in the building to teach. In other words, they couldn't employ enough teachers to break the classrooms, and it was more expensive to make more classrooms. It was easier and cheaper to make big classrooms where you had 30 to 40, sometimes even 50 people in a classroom. And a lot of those students felt lost because they weren't getting the personal touch. My my evidence suggested that the perfect classroom size per teacher is 15 to 17 students. And you don't see that very often in most, even colleges. But if that was the case, if we could get enough teachers in those buildings, of course, the expense of the teachers' salaries as well, we would have an ideal school system. And that's exactly what I found out.
That's awesome. I did not prepare enough on the research for that. Their report, which I'm trying to pull up, it's a huge document. They do outline why they felt that the bigger the school district, the less the dropout. So they do have some good stuff in there. I'm just not able to cite it off the top of my head, unfortunately. Cool. Anyone else? All right, great. Thank you, guys.